hit the record button, and that does it. Okay, so first of all, I want to acknowledge the sponsor of tonight's Dvar Chizuk. Very special. Someone down in North Miami, I hope in North Miami Beach. I happen to have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law down there with his family, and Shlomi and Aviva Friedman, who, in his own words, he calls me his Rabbi in Rosh Hashiva of 28 plus years. He blames me for everything. And it's really great, Shlomi, are you here, Shlomi, somewhere? I don't see you, but I hope you're here. And Shlomi and Aviva Friedman, very dear Talmud and his wife, lovely wife, and beautiful family. And really, I feel privileged to be his Rabbi and his Rosh Hashiva for so many years. I'm still trying to do the job. Hopefully one day I'll succeed. And I just want to remind you, Shlomi, if you're listening, and I recorded it so you'll be able to hear this if you're not, that, you know, when you go to Yeshiva Netzot, this is many years ago, it's more than 22 years ago, and, you know, you're supposed to hit the ground running. He hit the ground, eventually he got running, but he knows what I'm talking about. And the very first night, we had a great encounter, and Baruch Hashem, I'll never forget it, and Baruch Hashem, he's hit the ground, but he's still running, and Baruch Hashem growing and doing great things down there. He's been a wonderful asset to the community and his beautiful burgeoning family. May we share many simchas, and he also was a very early supporter of our shul. Many of the Sfarim that we have here, the original Sfarim, were donated by Shlomi and Aviva and schus to their family. Baruch Hashem, they had great schusim. May they continue to have schusim. May they continue to do the wonderful things they do. Wonderful, and thank you for your sponsorship. So tonight is with transitioning from, I actually finally, I know it's not probably visible on the screen, but I finally changed it. I was going to leave it there permanent, like the Twilight Zone, the last parsha we were here. I forgot it was Vayikra. I don't know how far back it was. Vayikra, I think, even earlier than that. So I finally changed that. I updated it tonight. Today was 10, and we're transitioning in Mitzvah Shem soon. I won't say it because we're already after Shkia. We're going to the next day. But, you know, in the spheres, every day has a certain relevance. And there are 7 midas. Is Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, and Netzach, Hoy, Yesod, Malchus. And every one has 7 facets. And it's a combination. So tonight we're transitioning into Netzach Shebegvura. Netzach Shebegvura, that means the eternity of strength. And what does that mean? And I was thinking like this, you know, Gvura means that we endure and face challenges in life. And Hashem throws us those challenges so that we should grow from them. That we should, it's Hashem's midas hadin, that's what Gvura is. But from that Gvura, we exhibit the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gvura, when we face a challenge and we overcome it. And it's not just to face that challenge at that moment, but we're supposed to take that challenge and become greater because of it. But a person often in life goes through a challenge and you face it and you overcome it and you exhibit tremendous kaiches hanefesh. You have certain internal strengths that you discover because of the hurdles that you have to overcome. Like an Olympic champion, you don't become that way unless you train. And when you go through challenges, you become great. But the trick is not just to be a gibor, to be gvura. You have to learn how to make a netzach shebegvura. You have to eternalize it. It has to be something that becomes part of you forever. And it's not just something you rejoice in at the moment, but that becomes a chelik of you, and it becomes a netzach shebegvura. That's the avodah of netzach shebegvura. And, you know, I was thinking, I saw a beautiful vart that I wanted to fit in, so I'm going to fit it in, and then I want to tell a beautiful story. And I want to translate into our own Avodas Hashem. You know, we're still transitioning from Yantif to Chodesh Iyar, so we still have the effects. We're still not saying Tachman, at least in our shul, we're still not saying Tachman. And, you know, I spoke about, and I just want to touch on something I saw from Rav Simcha Zisel Kelm. He says, you know, we say Oz Yashir in the future tense, even though they said it then, they said in the Oz Shar, but it says Yashir. And he says the reason why it's written in the future tense, even though it's referring to an event that took place and they sang Shira then, is because when you experience a moment that gives you great joy, if you ask someone, how long will that joy last? How long will it last? How long does it last? It's, you know, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But do you expect the simcha to last more than a few weeks? Certainly not. When does the simcha retain? When does it become a simcha that's with you for the rest of your life? And he says, at the Oz Yashir, they realized something. It wasn't just facing a challenge and rejoicing over having overcome what appeared to be a river, the sea that was going to flood them, and it split, and they saw their enemies go down, and they recovered. It wasn't just at that moment. They came to a madrega where what they experienced became eternal. The gvura they exhibited, the gvura, which is really part and parcel with simcha, because if you think about it, in life, the things that give us the greatest joy is when we face a challenge and overcome it. You can have good things come your way, win a lottery ticket, whatever it is, you get a present, but it's not deep simcha. Simcha is when you invest in something and you overcome it and you become great, and then you take that with you. They sensed that, but they took it with them because it wasn't just a momentary salvation that they rejoiced over. They realized that they came to a moment of an amazing emunah, that Hashem sends them challenges. They overcame the challenge, they rejoice in it, and they know that for the rest of their life, they're going to take that accomplishment and infuse it into their soul, so that every time they're facing challenges, that emunah will come and resuscitate this simcha that was there and remind them that through these challenges, that's where ultimate simcha comes. Yitzchak is gvura, right? Yitzchak, the greatest sacrifice, the greatest challenge. To give up his whole life, to give up and give his neck and say, tie me and just cut me, do it without any fear. And yet Yitzchak, as I often pointed out, is called Yitzchak because of simcha. And he was a man who lived his life joyously. Pointed out many times, he ate with friends, he rejoiced with his wife. There are many psukim only about Yitzchak who talk about the quality of life of enjoyment. Yitzchak, his name, Kishmai Kenu, because Yisachak, there's chayk and a joyous life. Because when you live your life with a sense of emunah that everything you do is a relationship with Hashem, it's not just a momentary salvation. It's a connection with Hashem that you take with you every second of your life. You take it with you and you never forsake it. And that simcha, that inner simcha of that accomplishment stays with you. And I saw brought down from Elia Lapian, brings from the name of the Telzer Rav, Rabbi Yosef Leib Bloch. He says, if you look in the Oz Yosher, it's amazing. He says the psukim go one by one. A miracle took place. Did they say Shira? No Shira. They saw them dead. They should be jumping for joy. Their enemies died. They didn't say Shira. They saw the Yad. They saw Hashem. Hashem. Did they say Shira? No. They saw the Shechina. Did they say Shechina? Did they say Shira? No. When did they say Shira? Only after Vayaminu B'Hashem, when they came to that emunah, the awareness of a relationship with Hashem that you take with you for the rest of your life. That's the moment that not shar, that simcha was something that they knew would take them for eternity. That's the simcha, and that's the netzach shebagvura. When you realize that and you live with emunah, and again, we are all facing challenges. I'm sure many of you, and it's obvious, and I see it, and I've seen it, and I've observed it. Many of you have overcome amazing challenges, and many have shared with me how the simcha and the joy that they feel in the little accomplishments or the big accomplishments, whether it's the davening that's improved, the focus on the connection with Hashem, or the challenges of raising the children and what they've accomplished and how their relationship with Hashem has deepened, and the excitement of having overcome and faced the challenge, whether it was not the simple challenge, the not so simple challenge of making a Pesach, and feeling the joy. It's a challenge that many overcame, and the joy that they felt is almost indescribable. I've so heard that from so many. But the key is to take it with us. We're going to go, Amit Hashem. It looks like, the tunnel, maybe at the end of the tunnel, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe we're getting a little closer. But if we don't take it, if we don't transform the Oz Shar into Oz Yosher and realize that Hashem is holding our hand and he wants to hold our hand and he always holds our hand. And it's not just that, Baruch Hashem, we can celebrate that we're alive, that we got out of the hospital and that everyone, Baruch Hashem, Larissa recovered and the burgers recovered, and Baruch Hashem, we have a tremendous, but it's not just about that moment. It's about taking it and internalizing it and taking it with us and living a life of simcha, of inspiration every moment. So I want to share with you a beautiful story I read over Yontif, and it happened to be touched me because I knew the person involved in the story. And I just want to add as an addition to the story, because tonight is about Netzach Sheba Gvura. How does a person internalize his accomplishments, the Gvura that you exhibit in life? How do you make it into something that's eternal? It also happens to be that the every day of Sphira corresponds to the 48 ways that the Torah is nickness. And the last day is the day that you review them all, and then you go into Shavuos. Every day corresponds to one. The one that corresponds to today is Dibuk Chaverim. Is the Dibur Chaverim, Hashem, we're together. But Dibur Chaverim, the power of Dibur Chaverim, with Chaverim you can accomplish a tremendous amount of things in Avodas Hashem, certainly in Torah. So I mentioned that because it's relevant to the story. I'm going to share a story, so hopefully I see a lot of kids are listening, and that's I tried to find something relevant that'll be Shavel L'Chol Nefesh, and I'm going to share with you a beautiful story. This story is about a young man whose name was Lezer Milstein. He became Rabbi Lezer Milstein. You may know the Milstein family. A lot of his children are great Talmidei Chachamim, Mechanchim. One of the most famous children of Rabbi Achmiel, Rocky Milstein of Project Inspire fame, someone I learned with in Amir. And I happen to know Rabbi Lezer Milstein because in the years that I learned in Kailul, in Borough Park, in Dvar, as you'll soon see, he was in Dvar. I took him home every day for years. I learned in the Kailul for 8 years and come out every day, probably for all those years. I took him home. He lived down the block. I lived on East 7th between M and N, and he lived between O and P. And I used to have a shul, maybe people know from Flatbush. And we were really good friends. I mean, he's much older than me. He's not living anymore. But this is a story about him, about Netzach Shebagvur. I want to share a story of Netzach Shebagvur. Lezer Milstein loved learning, and his parents wanted nothing more than his son, and this was living in Europe. But he was troubled. You know, he saw how the burden was, the parnasa, another mouth to feed. So he decided one day that he was going to go to yeshiva, not tell his parents. He told his sister, tell mom and dad, tell tati and mommy that I went to yeshiva. They'll take care of me. They don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm going to do their heart's desire. I'm going to go join yeshiva. And he joined. He went looking for yeshiva, and he went to Brisk and Amir, Kletsk, and then finally went to Minsk, and he found the Navardik yeshiva, which was headed by Reb Shmuel Weintraub, who was famous. But you know, it was already during the years when the Nazis started rumbling in, and they were getting more power. The yeshiva had to move from Minsk to Vilna. They learned actually in the Beis Medrash where the Vilna Gaon had davened, and they learning under tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. And Rosh Hashiva one day stood up in front of the Beis Medrash, and he opened up the Aron Kodesh. He opened the Aron Kodesh behind me. And he said, turning to the Bachram, and he addressed them for the last time he heard Rosh Hashiva. He said, the situation isn't good, and it will get worse. I want every one of you to open your Gemara, place your hand upon it, and be makabel upon yourself that you will learn Torah every day, no matter what happens until the day you die. That's what he said. Standing before the Aron Kodesh, Lezer, like all the other Talmidim, put his hand on the Gemara, and he promised that this would define his life. So shortly afterwards, he heard that his parents, he had heard that they were in Lemberg. So he figured, I'll go visit my parents. After all these years, he went to visit them. Meanwhile, he took a Gemara Chulin with him because he wanted to be Mekayim his Rebbe's dictate. And he took it along with him, with several pages. He couldn't take the whole Gemara. Chulin was the fat one. Couldn't travel. They took a bunch of pages from the Megillah. Chulin. He reached Lemberg and he realized that his parents, it was a false rumor, they weren't there. And he returned to Minsk only to discover that the yeshiva had disbanded. Nobody was there anymore. He couldn't find them. And he turned to Rabbi Shalom and said, Rabbi Shalom, he says, why would you do this to me? Why take me out of yeshiva if not to reunite me with my parents? And he thought that God had forsaken him. At the end, he turned out that not only didn't forsake him, the whole yeshiva was one of the only survivors of that yeshiva because, as Hashgach would have it, he was able to survive. He made his way. He didn't have papers, so he had to travel to Siberia, where he eventually went to Siberia. And, you know, all the stories about the hard labor they had to do. They gave him a shovel. He didn't want to be Michal Shabbos, so he used the shovel upside down. He shoveled upside down because he wanted to do it a shinoi. The guard, the guy in charge of him told him, he says, you know, you're obviously a real idiot. You know, you don't even know how to use a shovel. Go work in the kitchen. So he was able to work in the kitchen, avoid being Michal Shabbos. It was much easier to avoid, and that's how he survived. And he found himself a chavrusa. During the years he found a chavrusa. His name was David Meir Trevish. And at the end of those backbreaking days where they had no time for themselves, they would take the few pages of Masechtas Chulin that he had, Bigvura, learned in Yeshiva Bigvura. And he took the Gvura that he had in Yeshiva and infused it every day to fulfill his Rebbe's promise not to miss a day of learning. When the war ended, he found his wife, Tzipora Gnat, whose family has also been in Siberia. They went to Lodz. Eventually, they went away to America. And he became a Malamed and a Rav. And that's where I knew him. He used to be a Rav in Skver Cheder. And after learning, teaching in Skver, he learned in the base bench in the afternoon. That's where we developed our friendship. And one day, anyway, so eventually, years passed, he raised a beautiful family. And one day he felt pain in his chest. And he said, it's just a cold. And they told him to go to the doctor. So they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, you got to get to the hospital, you're having a heart attack. So he said, no, I'm not going to. I first have to go home. I have to daven. And he had to take his farm because he promised that he would never let a day go by. He goes home, he went to the hospital, and after 10 days, he had another heart attack, and that's when he died. And he died. And he always wanted to live in Eretz Yisrael. He never made it. So his children said they're going to bury him in Eretz Yisrael. And they did. The connection was their oldest son was married to a niece of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, a niece of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, a friend of mine's sister, Reb Shmulevitz from Toronto, his sister, and he had an uncle, Reb Yitzchak Ezrachi, a cousin, Reb Yitzchak Ezrachi, who's the son-in-law of Reb Chaim, who said, "I'll take care of the funeral arrangements," because they didn't know where to bury, what to bury. He said, "Don't worry, I'll take it. We'll find the plot for him, and that's what we'll do." Now they come and they found a plot in Har Zis. Now the minhag in Eretz Yisrael is that you don't follow a parent to the grave. If you make it to the grave before the parent comes, that's okay. But the children don't follow the sons don't follow the Aron of the father. So they went there, and an old friend of their father, Rabbi Avigdor Afen, who had learned with their father, Blazer Milson in Siberia, was there. And he says, "Where is the gravesite?" So he says, it's over there. So he turns and he looks at it, and he turns pale. And he sees like he's about to faint. And he says, they turn to him, he's an elderly man. He says, "Are you okay, Rabbi Avigdor?" So he says, "Who took care of finding the place for him?" He says, "How did you know?" So they didn't know what he's talking about. And Rabbi Avigdor turns to the grave and he points a finger to the matzeva right next to the dug grave. David Meir Trivish, the one he learned in Mesiras Nefesh every night in Siberia. They took a Gemara Chul and they learned all those years together. He was buried there unbeknownst to them. The Eivish that made a Netzach Sheba Gvura, a Gvura of learning Torah B'Shas Chak in Yeshiva in Vilna. And he undertook that his entire life, no matter what comes his way. And he took a Chavrusa in dark Siberia and frozen, frigid Siberia. And they learned every day. The Eivish that made a Netzach out of Gvura, and the friends were buried, the two Chavrusas, Diba Chaverim, because when it comes to Gvura and real Gvura, and you turn that Gvura, which is a simcha that drives you every moment of your life, and you do it day in and day out, you never give up. That's Netzach Sheba Gvura. That's what we're going to go into in tonight's Shvira. And it's appropriate to mention the story because tomorrow night, segueing into Yom HaShoah, we celebrate Tisha B'Av, but still it's a day to remember. And the Kedoshim certainly is chus for them. Amazing, amazing people who endured the Gvura in those days. And the Netzchias that we have is just living off of their chusim and hopefully implementing our own Netzach Sheba Gvura. So the message to everyone is, may we take the Gevura that we discovered within ourselves and internalize it and eternalize it. Not internalize it, realize the joy in that accomplishment and the simcha that Hashem has and simcha we should have. And if we realize when we go, Vayiminu Hashem, then we can say, Osh Yoshia forever. And that's really what I want to say tonight. I hope everyone listened. I said that at the end, we would open up the conversation. Now I just